Hey, welcome to this week's episode of The People's Report, News for the Left, brought to you by Solidarity TV. Today is February 18th, 2026. Will the job market collapse the economy in mirror of 2009? What social media apps may be giving your info to DHS? Did an ICE database mark an activist for death? What new way is the United States violating the Geneva Convention in the Caribbean? What's the deal with the Iran-US peace talks? Why would the peace plan for Gaza include Israel, but not Palestine? Why is the Department of Justice protecting Epstein's friends and not his victims? What AI company might the Pentagon cut ties with over ideological concerns? Who is the newest buyer of your identifying data scraped by TikTok? All these topics and more in tonight's episode of The People's Report. Timestamps in the episode description.
Well, you'll feel so devastated if you're feeling alienated, because it turns out you're not alone. Just open up your heart, let the revolution start, and grab that megaphone. Solidarity, solidarity, I need you and you need me. Solidarity, 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 solidarity.
Layoffs in January were the highest to start a year since 2009, Challenger says. February 5th, 2026 via CNBC. Layoff plans hit their highest January total since the global financial crisis, while hiring intentions reached their lowest since the same period, outplacement firm Challenger, Gray & Christmas reported Thursday. U.S. employers announced 108,435 layoffs for the month, up 118% from the same period a year ago and 205% from December 25. The total marked the highest for any January since 2009, while the economy was in the final months of its steepest downturn since the Great Depression. At the same time, companies announced just 5,306 new hires, also the lowest January since 2009, which is when Challenger began tracking such data. The crisis recession officially ended March 2009. With the recent narrative centering on a no-hire, no-fire labor market, the Challenger data suggests that the layoff part of the equation could be stepping up. Generally, we see a high number of job cuts in the first quarter, but this is a high total for January, said Andy Challenger, workplace expert and chief revenue officer for the firm. It means most of these plans are set at the end of 2025, signaling employers are less than optimistic about the outlook for 2026. To be sure, if employers are stepping up plans to furlough workers, it hasn't been showing up much in official government data. However, initial jobless claims for the week ended January 31st totaled a seasonally adjusted 231,000, the highest since early December. Through the spike likely had something to do with a brutal winter storm that hit large parts of the country. The longer-term trend still was at its lowest since October 24. Some high-profile layoff announcements have boosted fears of wider damage in the labor market. Amazon, UPS, and Dow Inc. recently have announced sizable job cuts. Indeed, transportation had the highest level from a sector standpoint in January, due largely to plans from UPS to cut more than 30,000 workers. Technology was second on the back of Amazon's announcement to shed 16,000, mostly corporate-level jobs. Planned hiring dropped 13% from January in 2025 and was off 49% from December. Challenger data can also be volatile and not correlated to official statistics. However, filings with the Labor Department in January under worker adjustment and retraining notification regulations indicate more than 100 companies have given notice of significant layoffs. In a separate report Thursday, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that job openings fell sharply in December to 6.5 million, a slide of 386,000 on a monthly basis and down from more than 900,000 from the October level. Openings are now at their lowest since September 2020. The decrease in available positions put the ratio of available jobs to unemployed workers at 0.87 to 1, down from more than 2 to 1 at its peak in mid-2022. On Wednesday, ADP reported that private employers added just 22,000 jobs in January. Great news for America, there aren't jobs. The fact that jobs went from two job openings for every worker to 0.87 jobs for every worker, or for every unemployed worker, should definitely have you kind of on the edge of your seat. The last time we saw this, as the article said you just heard, was around 2009. And we all know what happened in 2009 with the catastrophic recession and housing market collapse and job market collapse, etc. And this happens regularly in America under the capitalist order. The capitalists And capitalism as a philosophy, as a way of life, if you will, doesn't work for the average person. People are losing their jobs in order for the capitalists to make a few extra bucks through automation, in some cases, through AI in some more recent cases, and just generally through trying to shrink costs and increase profits by limiting the labor expense. So the real brief, anyone who knows how things work probably figured this out if they didn't learn it already. The way that profit, of course, comes from the costs or the revenue of your product minus the costs. The money you take in minus the money you spend to produce it. That's your profits. And of course, we all know that profits belong to the workers who created the product in the first place, not the owners who own the means of production, who merely own the means of production rather than operating them. That isn't, I don't want to say that's a topic for another day, but we'll get to that in a moment. We'll just run based off this for right now. So the profits, in order to increase profits, you have to either increase the cost, so increase the revenue by selling more product or by selling the product at a higher price, or by decreasing costs. And one can only decrease costs so much through cheapening of materials, or by reducing the materials involved, what we've been calling, I think, shrinkflation is what they've been calling it, where your Arizona iced tea goes from 24 ounces a can to 22 ounces a can. Arizona, and not to product place, Arizona's kind of the one where I'm going to shrug my shoulders at it because they're keeping it $1. I guess that's nice. But it's just one of the obvious ones that I can think of. You can shake the can, you can literally hear more air in it. So, that, or you cut costs by reducing the quality of the materials, which you can only do so far before people stop buying it because the product is garbage, or before those materials fail and whatever the product is, or by cutting labor costs. And how you cut labor costs is by, you can't really reduce workers' salaries or workers' hourly wages. The way that the system is set up, it's difficult to drop people in cost. You either have to get rid of them and hire new people at a lower cost, or just get rid of people. If it takes 50 people to make one product, and then you can trim it down to 48 people, well, that's 2 people's entire pay check that you just saved. And if you're selling the product at the same cost, that's now profit. And you keep doing that, and you trim it down until it's bare bones skeleton crew, which it seems so many places nowadays are running at. Going to Walmart, self-checkouts dominate the entire place. You have 1 or 2 cashiers trying to make the 60 self-checkouts work, and they're doing not a great job of it, but of course, can you blame them? There's 2 people who probably haven't been trained trying to run 60 computers, while 60 people are constantly trying to use them to check out. And quality is decreasing, but in places, Walmart in particular, in places where they have created basically a monopoly, they can slack off as much as they want. The public doesn't have a choice. And so this reduction in employment in order to increase profits for shareholders just creates not only poorer quality, but also poorer communities, fewer people bringing in income. And of course, the problem is, for the capitalists in particular, is that the fewer people who have income, the fewer people they have to spend and buy products. So it's a self-perpetuating cycle of people not having enough money, so people pay less, and so then the stores make less revenue, so then they try to increase profits, etc., etc. And it's just a constant spiral of degradation. One might call it, entropy inherent to the capitalist order, but that's what's happening. And of course, for the little guy, for us, whose fruits of our labor are being robbed by the capitalists, because of course profits belong to the employees, profits belong to the workers, the people who actually create the product, people who actually put their labor into making things happen. That's to whom the profit belongs to. And the profit is their unpaid wages, of course, all the time. If you work, you are entitled to all that you create. And the capitalists who don't create anything but simply own the means of production through legal framework, and then, of course, through armed enforcement of that legal framework, through our capitalist, racist, pig dog police, is how they maintain their exploitation of the average worker. And so the average worker has very little recourse and is either sent into poverty or has to compromise and accept the exploitation in order to get the pittance given to them by the person who has everything that they have only through the efforts of the worker. Hey, if you're enjoying the show, consider supporting us at solidaritytelevision.org. Reddit, Meta, and Google voluntarily gave DHS info of anti-ICE users. February 15, 2026, via Gizmodo. DHS is expanding its use of administrative subpoenas, which don't come from judges. Reddit, Meta, and Google voluntarily complied with some of the requests for identifying details of users critical of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, since as part of a recent wave of administrative subpoenas the Department of Homeland Security has been distributing to big tech the last few months, according to an anonymously sourced New York Times report. Those three companies, plus Discord, have received hundreds of such requests that have come from DHS recently. Meta, it should be noted, is a parent company of Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp. Administrative subpoenas used for this purpose represent an escalation. This tool, which comes not from a judge but from DHS itself, was formerly reserved for situations like child abductions, according to the Times. The users were targeted because their posts criticized ICE or pointed to the locations of ICE agents, the Times says. A Google spokesperson replied to the Times with a statement saying, "When we receive a subpoena, our review process is designed to protect user privacy while meeting our legal obligations. And we inform users when their accounts have been subpoenaed, unless under legal order not to or in an exceptional circumstance. We review every legal demand and push back against those that are overbroad." According to the Times, one or multiple of the relevant companies have stated that they notify users of these requests from DHS and give them a 14-day window to fight the subpoena in court before complying. Amazon has also been accused of at least some degree of participation with ICE's ongoing mass deportation efforts. In October, Amazon-owned Rein announced a partnership with Flock that would loop the AI-powered network into the content coming from users' doorbell cameras. According to a 404 media investigation, that network feeds information to law enforcement agencies at the local and federal levels, allowing for reasonable concern that ICE has access to all that footage. Protesters have launched an effort called Resist and Unsubscribe, targeting 10 tech companies they perceive as exceptionally supportive of ICE. That list includes Meta, Google, and Amazon, but not Reddit. So, social media giving your information to ICE or to DHS in general. Is that shocking to some people or to most of us? I would hope so. I think most of us have a more positive view of our relationship with power than we actually do. I certainly, of course, didn't even consider that these companies would be directly feeding information to law enforcement as a result of administrative subpoenas, which don't require judges involved. So no judging body, none of these checks and balances have to be applied in order to have or allow or order, maybe should be the better phrase, order these companies to offer my social media information to the government. And of course, the fact that the government is using this to crack down on, or at least monitor at the moment, dissenters and dissidents and political critics is nothing short of alarming. It's just more of course, the totalitarian police state of the modern America that we all, well, not all of us, that I and 330 million other people live in. And it's alarming and upsetting. Again, are we surprised? Yeah, probably. Should we be? Honestly, no. Because of course, all of these companies are capitalist enterprises that run for profit. So they're not exactly designed to maximize public engagement. They're not designed for people to engage with each other, to learn, to grow, to develop, to communicate, etc. They're designed for people to click on ads and view ads in order to generate revenue for shareholders, or to purchase subscription services to generate revenue for shareholders. And when push comes to shove, the capitalists always side with the fascists, because of course the fascists are simply the antibodies of capital. So when government dissidents are organizing or speaking out or exercising their protected speech and the protected rights of free speech on social media, even privately, A, the government really has no business monitoring that. Who cares? And B, it does provide a tangible threat to the shareholders of these companies, because the dissident speech, of course, is left-wing thought, whether it be from well-intentioned but poorly educated liberals who just want to see, ICE deport immigrant families and break up families and kidnap children and throw them in cages and brutalize men and women who are immigrants. They wanted it to do so behind closed doors where they don't have to see it, like most liberals and the Democrats have been cheering for these last couple months, or if it's because they legitimately want to see the capitalist order, the Epstein cartel, the ruling class, or even just ICE in general, torn down and thrown out. All of that represents a potential threat to capital, because of course the poorly educated liberals might one day become well-educated, or maybe just educated liberals, in which case they of course cease to be liberals and become leftists, ideally some kind of socialist, or the already organized or the already existing socialists become organized and move to do something about it. Or they just straight up start to question, hey, how come everyone's switching to AI programs and other such things that these corporations are heavily invested in? So they're all in bed with each other, all the corporations and the government. And that is, of course, because the United States was founded upon, I don't want to say capitalist principles, because capitalism was starting to become a thing, sort of, when the country was formed. But it was formed around the petite bourgeoisie and their ownership of capital. So and of course, in the early days, capital involved not just wealth or not just land, but also, of course, human beings owned as chattel. So the early stages of the United States formed by slavers in order to protect their investments, if you will call them that, in both land and in people, human resources, if you will, and then just expanded to general profiteering and the ownership and accumulation of capital as we know it today with mass industrialization and whatnot. So these corporations are not particularly distinct from the government in the sense that the government is designed to operate on behalf of these corporations, on behalf of capital, on behalf of wealth and power and privilege, not on behalf of the actual working people who make the world run. They do not want the working people to run the world. Makes them less rich, it turns them into one of us, and that's the worst thing that they can imagine. Plus, they're not going to have access to countless poor people to brutalize all over the place without accountability. So the government isn't just owned by capital, it exists for capital, and it was created to exist for capital and for what people are going to call the elites, right? So that's why these corporations are going to relatively willfully participate in the censorship or the supervision of free and protected speech, especially in private, because it gives them, or they give the government access to monitoring and suppressing dissidents that will one day oppose the capitalists themselves. Solidarity Television is an independent grassroots news organization. That means we rely exclusively on viewers like you. Support us at solidaritytelevision.org. Immigration authorities have surveilled Chicago woman shot 5 times during Midway Blitz, CBP Report, February 12, 2026, via ABC 7 Chicago. Miramar Martinez, the Chicago woman shot by federal agents last fall, was already on the government's radar before an agent opened fire, identified as a threat after a social media post. The ABC 7I team has obtained a Customs and Border Protection investigation report that identified social media postings and people that are believed to be a threat to officers. Martinez, a U.S. citizen, is a target of the report that highlights a reshared post with the comment, "They found him, LOL." That comment came from an ICE Watch Facebook page that claims an ICE agent working Operation Midway Blitz was also a YouTuber. When the government investigates or threatens criminal prosecution or takes really any sort of action against somebody for what's clearly protected speech, that's retaliation for exercising your First Amendment rights, and it's unconstitutional, said Colin McDowell, an attorney with the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, FIRE. McDonald represents 2 Metro Chicagoans whose own ICE citing Facebook page and app were shut down, he says, due to government coercion after allegations that they, too, were threats to agents. On Wednesday, they filed a lawsuit against the government. What you can't have is the government being able to crack down on any speech that they don't like just by saying that it, hypothetically, could lead to some harm. That's an invitation for the government controlling whatever it wants about our speech when we criticize or speak about the government, McDonald said. Their Eyes Up webpage featuring ICE interactions is still active through a browser. Among other videos on the site, it has the aftermath of the day Martinez was shot 5 times by Border Patrol agent Charles Exum in Brighton Park last October. 5 days before she was shot, the CBP open source intelligence team tagged Martinez as a threat. Her picture and information was disseminated to Operation Midway Blitz personnel, utilizing DHS databases to confirm her identity, according to the report. Acting ICE Director Todd Lyons testified this week before the House Committee on Homeland Security that there is no database of protesters. When pressed by California Democrat Representative Lou Correa if the feds are surveilling Americans, Lyons replied, "No, sir." Correa then asked, "Those people protesting, practicing their First Amendment right, photos of them being taken, they're not being placed on any kind of database?" Lyons said, "There is no database for protesters, sir." But according to the CBP report, Martinez was surveilled and DHS databases were used to confirm her identity and label her a threat. McDonald added, "When government officials are telling people that because they're protesting they could be put in a database, they could be made a target for federal investigation or even prosecuted, that creates a real chilling effect on our core First Amendment rights." It's unknown whether Agent Exum knew of the threat report before he shot Martinez. The Department of Homeland Security told the I-Team ICE tracking apps put the lives of men and women in law enforcement in danger. I'm not entirely sure where exactly to begin with this article. Certainly it is, again, another thing that might be surprising, probably shouldn't be, but certainly distressing, that the government is monitoring people who have dissident speech and then may pursue legal action against them or illegal action against them out of the false belief that dissident thought equals harm to the enforcers of capital, the police, ICE in particular. Certainly, there's a lot to be said about that in and of itself. This isn't anything new, of course. This is why the government under Joe Biden allowed or ordered law enforcement and other random thugs to brutalize pro-Palestinian demonstrators, especially on college campuses at the encampments. This is kind of what the Patriot Act was all about in the first place, etc., etc. We saw the same kind of thing. We see the same kind of thing take place every time there's a protest, right? Police see action, or police are encouraged to see, I should clarify, police are encouraged by the government to see dissident thought as being a threat deserving of violent retribution from the state. So this isn't new, but it's certainly alarming. Or, I don't know, perhaps maybe the fact that the government is saying, oh yeah, no, we definitely don't have profiles of these protesters, even though their agents certainly say that they do, and other articles we have discussed have elucidated that information. Again, are we surprised they're lying to us? No. It's kind of their whole thing. But, the fact that there isn't accountability and there's just denial of the facts is, again, maybe not surprising, definitely shouldn't be surprising. But I think that the very thought that social media postings about holding law enforcement accountable for their actions is considered an actionable threat, that these people are, quote, believed to be a threat to officers for saying things such as, simple thing of, oh, they found the ICE officer, for whoever it was that they were looking to identify. They found him. That in and of itself constitutes a material threat to police officers. Accountability, or even the belief in accountability, is considered by law enforcement, especially the DHS and especially ICE and CBP, to be a material threat of bodily harm against their agents. If the idea of accountability is that significant of a threat that the government is moved, or government goons are moved, to shoot a woman 5 times and thankfully not kill her, then what are they going to do when people have more aggressive opinions about law enforcement, about ICE? Does abolish ICE, could that be considered a threat on the lives of every single person employed by ICE, and thus require brutal force to suppress? These guys might end up thinking so. If observing law enforcement is considered a threat, which we know they already do consider it a threat based on articles we've read in the past, an ICE sighting can be censored and shut down by law enforcement and collaboration with corporations in order to suppress speech and suppress accountability for officers, is just abhorrent. And the fact this woman, who, when she was shot, had her information and her photograph disseminated to officers in order to warn them of this threat that she posed, I would not be surprised if that in and of itself led to her shooting. Now, ICE is run by and for and made up of neo-Nazi freaks. So these guys were probably going to shoot random people anyway. We already know they've already shot 2 people to death at random in Minneapolis in very high-profile public shootings very recently. So I wouldn't put it past them for them to have just shot this woman regardless of whether or not they were made aware that she was considered by the DHS to be a threat to law enforcement, which of course she wasn't. But the fact that social media posts, even super benign ones, such as expressing support that people in law enforcement might be held accountable by the American courts of law one day, can put you on such a high threat list that police officers are being handed your photograph and information to be able to identify you on sight, like you're an Iraqi elected official in 2003 during the American invasion, and then they subsequently shoot you to death. Well, thankfully not to death in this woman's case, but in future cases perhaps. Then what really is the freedom of speech? Does the freedom of speech exist in the United States? Does freedom of assembly exist in the United States? Does freedom of the press exist in the United States? Of course, we all know those answers are not if they oppose capital. But even more broadly speaking, if you are one of those undereducated liberals who just wants to see ICE do things secretly behind closed doors so that all of us white people can continue to ignore it, that alone could put you as such a threat, or have you seen by law enforcement as such a threat that they may feel the need to involve lethal force to put you down. Did you know the People's Report is produced for video and audio platforms? Stay informed by subscribing to us on YouTube or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Cuban official decries massive punishment by U.S. oil blockade. February 13, 2026, via Al Jazeera. Cuban diplomat Carlos de Cosio has accused the United States of imposing collective punishment on his country as the administration of President Donald Trump ramps up pressure to choke the Caribbean islands' access to oil. In a post on Twitter on Friday, de Cosio, who serves as Cuba's deputy foreign minister, described the situation from Havana's perspective. To be clear, A, Cuba requires importing fuel. B, the U.S. is applying threats and coercive measures to any country that provides it. C, lack of fuel harms transportation, medical services, schooling, energy, production of food, the standard of living. D, massive punishment is a crime, he wrote. The Fourth Geneva Convention says that collective penalties and likewise all measures of intimidation or of terrorism are prohibited under international law. Cuba relied heavily on oil imports from Venezuela, which have been cut off after the abduction of the country's leader, Nicolas Maduro, by U.S. forces last month. After the fall of Maduro, Cuba turned to Mexico for fuel. But the White House has threatened to impose additional tariffs on imports from any country that directly or indirectly provides oil to Cuba. The Mexican government halted the oil supplies to Cuba after the Trump administration's threat. But on Thursday, Mexico sent 2 ships loaded with humanitarian aid to Cuba. The U.S. oil blockade comes as the Trump administration pursues a policy of regional dominance over the Americas. Breaking news. The United States operates as a terrorist regime in the Caribbean. We're all so shocked by this one. Following hot on the heels of invading a sovereign state, executing a whole bunch of foreign nationals, and kidnapping its president, after summarily executing dozens upon dozens of random people without any oversight, without any trial, without any pushback from the rest of the government, the United States is now forcing collective punishment upon the Cuban people, or more accurately, escalating its collective punishment against the Cuban people with its oil blockade of Cuba, hoping to starve and bully the country into submission. One of the few countries in the world that is not owned by the United States. One of the few countries that so far has resisted the United States bullying. Will it continue to do so? I certainly hope so. But it can only hold out for so long. It's an island country that has had to historically rely a lot on trade and importation. And now it's being starved of fuel in order to force revolution conditions in the country, in order to force the people to acquiesce to United States demands in the way the United States has been demanding since literally 1959. And maybe arguably beforehand with the U.S. quasi-occupation of Cuba post-Spanish-American War. So the United States is looking to destroy Cuba because Cuba had the unmitigated gall to determine its own future for itself by the decision of the proletarian working class of Cuba and the agrarian classes, working classes of Cuba, and the actual people of Cuba determining for themselves how they should live and how their country should be run, rather than the American gangsters and capitalists invested in exploitative, brutal corruption and violent firms expropriating natural resources and manual labor of the Cuban people and the Cuban island. So, taking out Venezuela was one of the steps in the direction that is considered to be needed in order to crush Cuban resolve. Of course, the United States has been up to this same kind of shenanigans for years, from invading Cuba and in Bay of Pigs invasion, 1961, to the terror bombing campaigns of Cuba in the same era, to the repeated embargoes and blockades of Cuba. And of course, they're not just doing this with their own demands, right? Because we'll see people say, oh, well, how come Cuba can't live if it can't have access to U.S. goods? The United States uses its financial capital in order to pressure and punish other countries for trading with Cuba. seizing their assets, freezing their cash flows, etc., etc., etc. So it's not just as simple as, say, Claudia Sheinbaum saying, yeah, actually, we're going to give Cuba oil. It's more complicated than that. Now, I have my opinions on whether or not these countries should respect the will of the United States, and I certainly have my opinions on whether or not countries like Russia, or especially China, should step into the global role that they've been pretending at for the last couple of years and actually materially support their allies and, other U.S. adversaries in geopolitically strategic regions. That aside, the United States is trying to kill the Cuban people and kill their resolve. We saw the exact same thing or something very similar in Iraq in the 90s, where after the invasion of Kuwait, the United States led a terror bombing campaign that lasted like 10 years against Iraq, destroying their civilian infrastructure, destroying their power stations, their roads, bridges, highways, etc., in order to create not just famine conditions, but medicine famine conditions that led to the deaths of 500,000 children in Iraq, that Madeleine Albright famously said was worth it. And then, of course, we follow this up with a brutal invasion of Iraq in which we killed 1.5 million people and irradiated Fallujah and etc., burn pits. I could go on. You already know, or should already know, about the catastrophe of evil that the United States unleashed on Iraq for little other reason than geopolitical strategy, or the opening of oil markets, and of course toppling regional adversaries, both for the U.S. empire and especially the U.S. garrison state in the Middle East, Israel. Slightly different story there. But it's the same kind of thing. We're now introducing these incredibly harsh conditions onto Cuba in order to make it make the conditions ripe for either revolution, a pro-U.S. revolution, or subsequent U.S. attack and invasion. The U.S. imperial reach is going so far as to pressure other countries to end their Cuban medical diplomatic missions. So since 1959, for those of you who are unaware, Cuba's biggest export has been doctors. Cuba has an incredible medical program, especially given the embargoes and chokehold that the United States has had them under since 1959. They've invented a cure for a vaccine against lung cancer, for example, something that the United States has been unable to do. And their medicine, especially for the conditions that they're under, is incredibly high quality. So since 1959, Cuba has been exporting doctors to places all over the world, especially in revolutionary societies such as in Angola and in other places across Africa, but all across Latin America. And these doctors are leased by these governments in order to provide incredibly high quality, world-class medical care to people who otherwise would either have no access to it or would have to pay out the nose for American medicine or basically just go without. So by providing high quality health care to people who no longer would have access to it, Cuba has not only increased their standing on the world stage and helped to create diplomatic ties to other countries, but has also used its status in order to materially help the working people of the world. So we know that the Soviet Union helped to export revolution to other countries, and Cuba is helping to export medicine and health to other countries. And those missions are being shuttered by the pressure of the United States, such as in Guatemala, which has had a 30-year medical mission from Cuba to assist the Guatemalan people in receiving affordable health care. A lot of that money that Guatemala pays to these doctors is paid to the Cuban government. And it's a way to help starve out and render broke the Cuban government so that Cuba cannot maintain its own sovereignty in the Caribbean. Of course, Guatemala, scene of a genocide after a U.S.-backed military coup in the 1950s, it is really no stranger to the brutality that the U.S. will impose upon places that it feels the need to control. And so they're bending to the will of the United States for, Guatemala is not exactly a rich or powerful country, and it's effectively right on the doorstep of the United States, and ending its diplomatic, or ending its payment for the services of Cuban medical teams. And all of this is just a continued cruel ploy by the United States government to collectively punish the Cuban people for the crime of standing up for themselves. If you like the People's Report, check out our other shows at solidaritytv.org. Iran-US talks. Agreement reached on guiding principles after a constructive meeting, Tehran says. February 17, 2026, via The Guardian. Iran has described the latest round of indirect talks with the United States as more constructive than the previous set earlier this month, and said agreement had been reached on general guiding principles that could lead to a further meeting to discuss its nuclear program. The talks, held in Geneva through Omani intermediaries, were to discuss the terms for Tehran constraining its nuclear program under the supervision of the UN Nuclear Weapons Inspectorate. They ended after 3.5 hours. There's no immediate word from the United States delegation, but the U.S. was expected to continue its military buildup in the region before a further round of talks in about a fortnight, designed to address the gaps between the two sides. The talks took place against the backdrop of a now familiar slew of contradictory messages from Donald Trump, in which the U.S. president said he believed Iran wanted a deal, but also highlighted the U.S. naval military buildup in the region. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said after the talks that agreement was reached on general guiding principles, and added, "The atmosphere in this round of negotiations was more constructive. Good progress had been made in comparison with the first meeting. Both sides have positions that will take some time to get closer to each other. The path to an agreement has been started, but that does not mean we can reach an agreement quickly." He added that the aim was to exchange texts on a draft agreement and then set a date for a further meeting. Iran insisted throughout the talks, the first round of which were held on the 6th of February, that it would not discuss its ballistic missile program or its support for so-called proxy forces in the region. In a speech to the UN, Araghchi said Iran did not seek nuclear weapons and stressed its willingness to cooperate with the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. Iran instead focused its offer on a plan to dilute its 40-kilogram stockpile of 60% highly enriched uranium, the access it would grant the IAEA, the UN's nuclear inspectorate, to Iran's bombed nuclear sites. Discussions also continued on the length of time that Iran might suspend enrichment, in part because the U.S. bombing of its nuclear sites would make it impossible to do for as long as 3 years. But Iran has not ceded its right to enrich uranium domestically, a central U.S. demand. The Iranian side was led by Araghchi, who on Monday met the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi. The U.S. side met Grossi on Tuesday, underlining the verification of the nuclear industry was at the center of Tuesday's round of talks. Any deal to constrain Iran's nuclear program would require the full return of the IAEA inspectors to Iran's nuclear weapons facilities. Previous talks in Cairo on the Iran-IAEA protocols that would allow the IAEA full access to 3 main nuclear bombed sites broke down. A small number of IAEA inspectors are still working with Iran, but they have no detailed knowledge of the damage caused by U.S. bombing or how many of the centrifuges could be quickly restarted. The process of downblending highly enriched uranium, downgrading it from weapons grade, is an acknowledged technology. Tehran also offered Trump sweeteners in the form of a prosperity package and a non-aggression pact between Iran and the U.S., and possibly Israel. At times, Trump has said the best outcome would be for Khamenei to stand down, but the U.S. does not seem to have had a strategy to achieve this. Despite all of the discussions about peace talks and winding down operations and peace deals and treaties and such, the reality is that the Trump administration has started a buildup or escalated a buildup of military forces in the Middle East to a scale not really seen since January of 2003 in preparation for the invasion of Iraq. Do I think they were going to invade Iran or attack Iran? It's hard to say. Probably by the time this video comes out, we will have had our answer. I am presently leaning towards no, but I think that's just wishful thinking, if I'm being honest. Israel has been pushing for the United States to attack Iran forever. Netanyahu's always up to some stuff at the UN or with Trump. I mean, basically shaking that little baggie of whatever his name is from Iraq, well, for the invasion of Iraq. Powell. Little baggy like Powell. Oh, see, they got nuclear weapons. All the time. Just trying to get us to attack Iran. So that way, the only real threat to Israel's stance in the Middle East, only real remaining threat to Israel's stance in the Middle East, is taken off the board. This is, of course, why the United States has been funding and backing all of those protests in Iran. Certainly, the government of Iran is not the greatest of all time, and certainly has a lot of internal contradictions to address that I have full faith in the ability of the Iranian people to address and to solve on their own without the need of the United States, and certainly without installing the Shah or any other ridiculous monarchical concepts. But these settings are, of course, pretense for war, pretense for the American public, especially the liberals, to accept violence against the Iranian people and against the Iranian government, and to kind of help build support with Western allies in order to give them an excuse to participate in this war against Iran, which of course is just at the behalf of the United States in order to maintain its complete hegemony over the Middle East, given that the other regional powers, namely Egypt and Saudi Arabia, are thoroughly in the pocket of the United States, and of course Israel is simply an extension of the United States. It's our military garrison state that pretends to be a legitimate country in the Middle East. The other remaining countries in the area, Lebanon, is on the brink of civil war. Syria, of course, has been handed over to ISIS by the United States, and we welcomed the leaders of ISIS to run Syria with open arms. And they're certainly not interested in combating U.S. interests or Israeli expansion. Jordan, of course, their excuse for a king is quite literally willing to sacrifice his people as a shield to defend Israel. And Iraq has been bulldozed by the United States and is no longer a regional power at the moment. The only other, I want to say heavy hitter, the only other hitter in the region, the UAE, of course, is a complete joke. It's not even a real country, and they just got blown out by Saudi Arabia. Few good things Saudi Arabia ever did, blow out the UAE. I wish they would just blow them out completely. And that just leaves Yemen. Of course, our brave and noble comrades in Yemen who time and time again put their lives on the line to, at the very least, relieve the pressure on Palestine. So, and Yemen, of course, has defeated the United States in military conflict very recently. They defeated Trump and Biden back to back. So things are actually, I won't say looking good for Yemen, but UAE is out. They beat Trump. They beat Biden. I don't know. Things might be looking pretty good for them. So that leaves, of course, Iran as the only real contender. Because Yemen, for as wonderful of a people as they are, and as ideologically committed to liberation as they are, they don't have the power that Iran does. Straight up. And that leaves Iran. And Iran has a threat not just in its people and military, but in its strategic positioning as the only other land bridge between Europe and Asia that isn't Russia. So, of course, aside from the make-believe about the protests and all that, the other excuse is for fighting Iran that can be sold to the American public is nukes. They've been claiming that Iran is 2 weeks away from building a nuke forever. I remember being flabbergasted by the questioning during the vice presidential debate in 2024, where the moderator said, hey, Iran is 2 weeks away from developing a nuke. Well, guess what? It's been 2 years, haven't built one. They're not going to. They have strict religious guidelines against building them. My commentary on whether or not they should be following those guidelines notwithstanding, they're not building nukes. So that's every time you hear, oh, Iran's building a nuke, complete fabrication. There's a joke that goes something like, archaeologists in Jerusalem unearthed a 3,000-year-old stone tablet from the days of Solomon, and inscribed on it says, Persia is 6 weeks away from developing a nuclear weapon. Because they've been saying this forever. And it's, of course, it's all a fabrication in order to create this fear of Iran in the West, and to justify military attacks on the country and on the people. The United States has, of course, also put starvation sanctions on Iran, much like they've done in Cuba, of course, and Iraq before them. Of course, Iran has far more ability to withstand this than Cuba does, not to mention their vast oil production, but also their own medical and scientific advancements, their incredibly highly educated population, and the fact that they just straight up are adjacent to allied countries, or countries that are allied with them. So, namely Russia. So, they have a lot more geopolitical or geostrategic resources available to them. And that is the true story of why the United States is gearing up for war against Iran. Iran threatens American hegemony simply by not being in the pocket of the United States. And unfortunately, that's all there is to it. They're not going to be developing a nuke because they have no wish to. The Ayatollah specifically prohibits it based on religious grounds, that every weapon of mass destruction is an affront against God. So they're just straight up not going to do it. And all the talks about, they got 60% enriched uranium. It's not nuclear grade. It's not weapons grade. They can't do anything with it. I want to say that it actually has a legitimate use in medicine, but I'm not a doctor. I'm not entirely sure how nuclear medicine, or whatever it's actually called, works. So don't quote me on that. I've read that previously in other news articles, but I don't really know how that works, or to what extent. It's all, of course, for Israel. And when I say for Israel, I mean it's for the United States and United States global hegemony, and the dignity, if you will, of the embarrassed stockholders and capitalists who were thrown out of Iran twice, first by Mossadegh and then by the Ayatollah in 1979. This week's book recommendation is the autobiography of Malcolm X, As Told to Alex Haley. This book tells the life and death story of brother Malcolm X and his journey from petty street criminal to Islamic scholar and black revolutionary. Israeli FM Saar to attend Trump's first Board of Peace meeting on Thursday, February 19th. February 14th, 2026, via New Arab. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar will attend U.S. President Donald Trump's first formal Board of Peace meeting on the 19th of February, two Israeli officials said on Saturday. U.S. officials told Reuters this week that Trump will announce a multi-billion-dollar reconstruction plan for Gaza and detail plans for a UN-authorized stabilization force for the Palestinian enclave at the meeting in Washington. Delegations from at least 20 countries, including heads of state, are expected to attend the meeting of the board, whose creation was endorsed by a United Nations Security Council resolution as part of Trump's plan to end the Gaza war. While regional Middle East powers, including Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, as well as major emerging nations such as Indonesia, have joined the board, global powers and traditional Western U.S. allies have been more cautious. The U.S. officials said that the meeting will focus on Gaza, where 2 years of war have left much of the Palestinian enclave in ruins. Israel and Palestinian militant group Hamas agreed to Trump's plan last year, with the ceasefire taking effect in October. More than 590 Palestinians have been killed in rounds of violence that have erupted since. Both sides have accused each other of violating the ceasefire, even as Trump's administration has pressed for progress to the next steps envisioned in the plan. One of those is the deployment of the International Stabilization Force, as Israeli troops further withdraw and Hamas disarms. The U.S. officials said Trump will announce that several countries plan to provide several thousand troops to the stabilization force that is expected to deploy in Gaza in the months ahead. Hamas has so far rejected demands to lay down its weapons, and Israel has said that if the group does not disarm peacefully, Israel will have to force it to do so. Israel on the board of peace, more like Israel is board of peace. The so-called ceasefire agreement, of course, has resulted in, according to the article, 590 more people killed by Israel, not including the people who have died as a result of the famine and starvation conditions in Gaza and in Palestine at large. It also doesn't take into account the brutality against the Palestinian people in the West Bank committed by Israelis, the IDF, and their settlers, and engaging in Lebensraum activities with their hilltop youth and such. Just committing murder every single day against innocent people and committing barbarous acts of animal cruelty in order to intimidate and demoralize the Palestinian people. I find it very interesting, of course, that the article talks about how, both sides have committed violations of the ceasefire, but they only give a body count for the Palestinians killed. How many Israelis have been killed since? I know we got some reports recently of a Hamas fighter being trapped in a tunnel for who knows how long and dying of thirst and hunger. It comes out with an axe and hacked a bunch of IDF soldiers to death. Fantastic. Great. Love to see more of that. But, this is not really a violation of the ceasefire. Israel is still occupying Gaza. They're still killing people. There is no ceasefire. It's a complete fabrication. And, the idea that Hamas should disarm is ludicrous. Why? Why should Hamas disarm? What obligation does Hamas have to disarm? First of all, what do they benefit from doing so? But why should they bother? Why doesn't Israel disarm? Why doesn't the IDF disarm? How come it is only the Palestinians who must disarm? That is not peace, that's capitulation. And, true peace is not the absence of war, but the presence of justice. And the presence of justice in Palestine means the absence of Israel. So the idea, if we want to see peace, the IDF has to disarm. And quite frankly, the United States won't, but the United States should be the ones to do it since they're the ones who created this monster in the first place. Or at least the modern iteration of it. Of course, we can accurately blame the United Kingdom, specifically England, for creating Israel, but that's a different conversation. The United States created the beast as it is today. And of course, that beast is just the pet of the United States. It's their attack dog. So, the fact that Israel is on this board of peace in order to determine the next steps for Gaza, the next steps for Palestine, but the Palestinians aren't, is really just giving away the whole game, right? It's not about creating peace. It's about creating a UN-recognized Israeli occupation and washing away the blood to re-legitimize Israel as a state. There is no way they should be involved as a peace partner in this. If we were going to have, a peace operation with Ukraine and Russia, would the Ukrainians tolerate Russia running the peace program? It's not a commentary on that conflict. It's just the reality. They would not accept that. Would the Russians accept the Ukrainians running it? Maybe, probably not. Would anybody else do that? No, because it's a capitulation. The Palestinians should not capitulate to Israel, and allowing Israel to run the show, or to even just be part of the show, is demanding a capitulation. But also, I don't know how Israel exactly plans to disarm Hamas. They've done a terrible job of it so far. Sure, they can blow up a lot of buildings and commit mass atrocities and create starvation conditions, but Hamas isn't going anywhere. They haven't disarmed, they haven't been defeated, they haven't been broken. The Palestinian people aren't giving up locations of, Hamas fighters or leaders, aside from the Abu Shabaab gang and other rare, incredibly rare compradors in Gaza. Who's going to make them disarm? Are the Israeli soldiers going to go and disarm them? No. Israel sucks at fighting, and the last thing they want to do is put their precious little boys in front of guns. That's why they do everything with tanks and airstrikes and remote-controlled bunker buster bombs and driving rigged APCs into neighborhoods to blow them up, or sniping people, or airstrikes and mortar attacks and shelling, because they don't want to actually confront or combat Hamas, because they're going to lose. One Hamas fighter in a building, and these Israeli commandos, so-called, literally come tumbling down the stairs like roly-polies. It'd be so comical if they weren't genocidal freaks. It still is kind of comical. I've never not smiled seeing an Israeli get shot. So, and if there's a war with Iran, hopefully we're going to see a lot more of them get. Woo! It's one positive about that. So, this whole thing is a farce. It's a farce to allow the United States and the other funders of the Israeli state feel good about themselves while still creating or trying to create win conditions for Israel. I think it's telling that a number of U.S. allies are not involved in this process. Not in the sense of they don't trust the United States, but that maybe they recognize this, and maybe one would think, maybe not one would think, one would hope, one will give them the benefit of the doubt today because, I don't know, I guess you have to at some point just make yourself feel better. Give them the benefit of the doubt that they don't want to be a part of this complete farcical operation, or that they've just lost the taste for the genocide of the Palestinians. The United States hasn't. Israel hasn't. We're probably going to fight until Israel is forced to give up and be destroyed, and the Palestinian people become victorious. And the peace, so-called Board of Peace, is straight up not going to work, and it's not going to create peace. It's only going to create newer, different conditions for war. Hey comrades, remember the words of Chairman Mao: civilize the mind and make savage the body. In order to outperform ICE, we must first match their physical fitness standards. If it makes sense for you, start training your distance running skills to complete a 1.5 mile run in 14 minutes and 25 seconds or less. Sexual assault advocates say this is the most shocking thing about the Epstein files release. February 14, 2026, via Huffington Post. On January 30th, the DOJ released more than 3 million pages of files related to the investigation into the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, who moved among the world's elites while eluding federal prosecution for years. While the Justice Department aggressively shielded the names of powerful men mentioned in the documents, it failed to extend the same care to survivors of Epstein's crimes. Many women have chosen, often at great personal cost, including threats on their lives, to speak publicly about the abuse they suffered. Others have not. Yet, the release exposed email addresses and included nude photographs that made it possible to identify the names and faces of potential hitherto unknown victims. Although Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche said on Friday that the DOJ tried to prioritize victim privacy, he admitted that mistakes are inevitable and urged the public to report any errors to a DOJ email tip line. By Tuesday, the DOJ said that it had taken down all flagged files and claimed the mistakes were due to technical or human error. The fact that Epstein is arguably the most well-known trafficker in history, and yet not one victim has received justice, speaks volumes to others who've been sexually assaulted, said Catherine Stamoulis, a mental health counselor specializing in sexualized violence. None of his vast network of male rapists have been investigated, she said. That sends a message loud and clear. Our country does not care about victims of sexual abuse, and that silence is safer than seeking help. Publishing victims' names and photos is not an isolated incident either. It's part of a broader pattern of the DOJ failing to respect victims' rights, said Lee Gilmore, a professor emerita at Ohio State University. Although the Department of Justice has been legally required to release the Epstein files, only a fraction of the material has been made public, and only after sustained public pressure by their survivors and their advocates, she said. This isn't merely an administrative failure, she said, but a paradigmatic instance of institutional silencing. According to Gilmore, the institutional silencing takes a form of managed visibility, in which the public sees only parts of the Epstein files, but far too much about the women he preyed upon. The public is left unable to know what it does not know, Gilmore said. Evidence exists, but is being presented in ways that protects abusers and exposes victims to ongoing and new forms of harm. On Sunday, Annie Farmer, who has testified in court about how she was groomed and abused as a teenager by Epstein and his partner, Ghislaine Maxwell, shared her thoughts about the failed redactions. Gilmore thinks she said it best. As Farmer disappointedly told The Times, "It's hard to imagine a more egregious way of not protecting victims than having full nude images of them available for the whole world to download." Of course, the government is going to always care more about protecting the rich than protecting the poor. That's how they function. It's the exact role of capitalism in the world. Our entire system is built to exploit the poor, the working class, which, if you're new to this idea, if you work for a living, you are part of the poor. I don't care if you make a lot of money or don't. You're part of the poor, you're part of the working class. If you own to make a living, instead of working, you're part of the rich, the ruling class, the owning class. So when I say the poor, I'm not talking about, people who make less than $24,000 a year. Of course, they're included. But I'm not talking only about them. I'm talking about the people who don't have because they have to work for a living against the people who do have because they own for a living. The daughters of the poor are always going to be abused horrifically by the sons of the rich. That's how our society works. And that's not a good thing. This is why our society has to be completely dismantled, destroyed, and rebuilt from the bottom up. This is why we need global socialist revolution. This is why we need, at the very least, a great proletarian cultural revolution across the West, especially in the United States. Because the fact is that many of the sons of the poor think that they are equally entitled to the daughters of the poor. And of course, we're not even getting into sexual abuse of young boys by men or anything else, or by women, for that matter. Obviously, that's all there. I don't mean to imply that it only works in one way from men to women. But it's just illustrative. And so when the sons of the rich get in trouble for abusing the daughters of the poor, who is in charge of seeing that justice gets served? It's never the poor. It's always the rich, the other sons of the rich. And so they're always going to look out for each other. The rich have really good class consciousness, whether or not they entirely realize it as such. Whether or not we realize it as such, the rich are always going to look out for each other. This is why they're all in bed with each other, sometimes quite literally. It is in order to preserve their class as the ruling class and our class as the ruled class. Protecting the people has never been the actual job or purpose of the state, or of the Department of Justice, or of the police, or of our courts, even if the participants in those systems want to, even if the participants in those systems intend to, even when the participants in those systems try to, because the systems are not designed to help people. They are designed to enforce the will of capital upon the people. The police are there not to help you as adjudicated in court. They are not obligated to help you. So many police officers will tell you that their number one job is to make it home at the end of the day, not to protect the people. Their job is to protect capital. This is why if your car gets stolen, well, that sucks. But if a car from a car dealership gets stolen, that car gets returned. The ruling class believes it has the right to exploit and use the ruling class to their benefit through whatever way possible. Usually, this is merely by exploiting our labor and stealing the fruits of our labor in order to maintain their wealth, and in order to create their wealth, and in order to maintain their control over us. But other times, they exploit and abuse the working class by picking them out of a crowd and then using them to satisfy their sexual desires, we'll say. And it's no accident, of course, that so many of these victims came from Eastern Europe after the fall of the Soviet Union. With the Soviet Union still in existence, I do not believe Epstein would have been anything more than a pervert in jail today, or a regular county prison. Hopefully, if he even got caught in the first place. So, it's no surprise that especially, we'll switch to this track, especially under the Trump administration. Not to say the Biden administration or the Obama administration were hunky-dory. Of course, it was under Trump that Epstein got arrested in the first place and thrown in prison. It's where he died in prison under the Trump administration. And we know that Obama's lawyer or something like that was involved with Epstein, etc. And the Clinton, or at the very least, Bill Clinton was. So, it's not a partisan thing here, because, of course, it's a class thing. All these gentlemen are members of the ruling class. But especially under the Trump administration, which Trump is expressly referenced and implicated in the Epstein files, of course his administration is going to do whatever it can to protect itself and do whatever it can to discredit or punish the women who pointed out the wrongdoings of Donald Trump. This isn't anything new. Of course, when Bill Clinton raped people, he got away with it too. Joe Biden, I believe, was accused of rape as well. He obviously got away with it. Obama, thankfully, to the best of my knowledge, I have not heard anything about any sexual impropriety about Obama, but hey, he murdered a ton of people in Iraq, in Yemen, in Afghanistan, in Libya, in Syria, etc. So it's not exactly like he's off the hook, but at least he's not a rapist. And sorry, I lost my train of thought there. And so the Trump administration is going to do whatever it can to protect Donald Trump and his cronies and his friends, and of course his allies across that class, of which Epstein was one, and punish and intimidate and destroy the victims, not only to discredit them in the eyes of the public, but also to humiliate them and to punish them for speaking out. I think that the people cited in this article were some of the best people to have commented on it, because their views, whether they understand it or not, are expressly that of a socialist analysis of the situation. The systems of so-called justice are designed to protect and empower the ruling class at the expense of the working class. And this is why the Epstein class, if you will, the entire Epstein class, that would be the ruling class, who's, first of all, felt entitled to exploit people, because of course they do. That's how they generate their wealth, entirely through exploitation. So if they're already going to abuse us in order to take our money, why can't they abuse us to take our bodies as well? Hey, it'd mean a lot if you join our Patreon at solidaritytelevision.org. Pentagon reportedly hopping mad at Anthropic for not blindly supporting everything the military does. February 15, 2026, via Gizmodo. Autonomous drone swarms and mass surveillance are apparently big sticking points for the AI colossus. The Pentagon is, according to an anonymously sourced Axios story, threatening to quit using Anthropic AI tools because of the company's insistence on maintaining some limitations on how the military uses its models. The Pentagon source who spoke to Axios apparently said that of all the AI companies it deals with, Anthropic is the most ideological. Last year, Anthropic trumpeted its excitement about winning its $200 million Pentagon contract, calling it a new chapter in Anthropic's commitment to supporting U.S. national security. One interesting thing about Axios' story is that the two areas of concern cited by the Anthropic representative, it quotes, hard limits around fully autonomous weapons and mass domestic surveillance, were also two areas of concern mentioned by founder-CEO Dario Amodei on Ross Douthat's Interesting Times podcast, released 3 days ago by the New York Times. Much of this is also spelled out in Amodei's hand-wringing essay from last month titled The Adolescence of Technology. But just last week on Interesting Times, Amodei suggested that any president, not just Donald Trump, could hand too much power to AI defense tech, and that's why he says he's worried about the autonomous drone swarm, and notes that the constitutional protections in our military structures depend on the idea that there are humans who would, we hope, disobey illegal orders. With fully autonomous weapons, we don't necessarily have those protections. Amodei also sketched what an abuse of AI for mass domestic surveillance might entail. It is not illegal to put cameras around everywhere in public space and record every conversation. It's a public space. You don't have a right to privacy in public space. But today, the government couldn't record all that and make sense of it. With AI, the ability to transcribe speech, to look through it, correlate it all, you could say, this person is a member of the opposition. Losing Claude would actually matter, according to Axios. The defense official who leaked to Axios claimed that the other model companies are just behind Claude. Exactly what the bone of contention is remains a bit muddled in the Axios story, which claims that the Pentagon claims Anthropic sought information from Palantir about whether its tech was part of the January 3rd U.S. attack on Venezuela. Anthropic denies expressing concerns that relate to current operations. Nonetheless, the Pentagon official says the issue was raised in such a way to imply that they might disapprove of their software being used, because obviously there was kinetic fire during that raid and people were shot. Also, how exactly something like Claude Code, which allows anyone to make software if they're inclined, might be incorporated into the real-world puncturing of human bodies with bullets, remains similarly unclear. I can't shake the feeling that this whole article is, or was to some extent, a puff piece PR move by the company Anthropic in order to kind of get people less inquisitive about their brand and their products, right? I think it was Claude recently that, I think that's what they call it, Claude. More like Claude, am I right? C-L-O-D is the joke I'm making. Was one of the AI programs that they ran some tests on to see whether or not it would kill a human in order to preserve itself, and it did, like, most of the time. Or something like that. I don't know. Maybe this is just a PR move in order to cover that up. Or just because maybe the CEO legitimately is like, maybe this company shouldn't be involved in mass murder. Should just be involved in regular surveillance stuff. But the whole thing, they're ideological. They're questioning whether or not they should be involved in anything the military does. First of all, they didn't actually do anything. The article only points out that the controversy or the conflict between Anthropic and the Pentagon comes from allegedly Anthropic questioning whether or not their materials were used in the attack on Venezuela. That's it, questioning. Did this happen? There's no action involved. So really, this article is like heartwarming. Devoted beater of wife refuses to beat his child. Like, we're supposed to, oh my God, wow, isn't that so wonderful? He's not hitting children as well as grown people. Like, sure, but maybe he still shouldn't be beating grown people. At the end of the day, it's still one of these AI surveillance tools. It's another one of these AI corporations that are destroying local communities through these massive AI data centers, sucking up their energy and water and land, polluting the earth, helping to increase temperatures and just habitat destruction and those weird hums that people are reporting now from these infrastructures, probably giving everyone some kind of turbo cancer who lives near them. I don't know. The last part I just kind of made up, but it wouldn't surprise me. It probably would. I don't think that happens, but that's a different story. That's what these companies are, and that's what they do. They already have a contract with the Department of Defense. Are they going to cancel their, $2 billion contract or something? Out of remorse, out of guilt? They already did it. It's not like it's a surprise as to what the Department of Defense, so-called, does. It murders people. It murders predominantly brown people in the global south for sport and for money. So they got a $200 million Pentagon contract, and referring to it as a new chapter in Anthropic's, quote, commitment to supporting U.S. national security. So really, what are they doing? Well, what are they doing that has the Department of Defense allegedly up in arms? Now, yeah, this administration is super sensitive. And so questioning them at all is, a material threat against their law enforcement officers or whatever. Anthropic saying, hey, are you using my stuff to mass survey people or to use it in autonomous kill programs? And they see that as a legitimate material threat against the Department of Defense or whatever, probably. But Anthropic didn't do anything. So glazing them in an article about how fantastic they are, or really not even how fantastic they are. The whole article kind of even does point out in a paragraph that, like, hey, these guys are still kind of evil. But in this kind of nothing burger puff piece, just to kind of rehabilitate Anthropic as just being a regular run-of-the-mill evil AI corporation instead of a violently evil AI corporation, it's just kind of misleading to me. I do think that the CEO makes some good points here about mass domestic surveillance and fully autonomous weapons. And, he's like, he points out in his book, I guess, that he kind of depends on the idea that if something is immoral or illegal, that actual human fighters aren't going to follow through on it, whereas computer programs absolutely will. I think that's incredibly naive. I think that's kind of the opinion that only someone who is woefully undereducated or of the ruling class would hold, because we know that just doesn't happen. U.S. soldiers volunteer for the Army and look forward to committing atrocities all the time. The fact is that the My Lai massacre in Vietnam was such a newsworthy event, not because of the atrocity, but because it was a U.S. soldier who intervened to stop it. It was happening like on the daily in Vietnam. Not to mention the terror bombing of Laos and Cambodia and the U.S. support for the Khmer Rouge and all that. Not to mention all the atrocities we've committed in Iraq and Libya and Syria, in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Afghanistan, in Yemen, just to cover the Middle East. Afghanistan isn't the Middle East, but you get the point. Our terror bombings of Iran. So, these soldiers aren't going to say no. They act as autonomous drones. You say, kill these people, and they do it. And then they get to go home and cry about how bad they feel that they murdered innocent people, and we have to feel sorry for them for some reason. Oh, boo-hoo-hoo, I helped the child rapists in Afghanistan take power and expropriate heroin to create the narcotics catastrophe in the United States, and then I got blown up. I'm so sad, cry for me, I digress. So, it's only the opinion that someone who's very naive or of the ruling class who feels superior to the rest of us, would believe in. And of course, this gentleman is a millionaire, a billionaire, a member of the ruling class. So he's allowed to have these delightful views. But the reality is he benefits from the mass exploitation of people. That's how he gets his money. So I don't really see why he'd exactly have a problem with autonomous robots killing people when he chooses to destroy the lives of human beings every single day, and that's how he drives his car, buys his house, sleeps in his yacht, and does everything else he does for leisure. Another way you can support us is by following us on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. How TikTok 2.0 became a weapon for ICE. February 9th, 2026, via New Republic. While liberal hawks cheered the platform's transition to the jumble of jargon now known officially as TikTok USDS Joint Venture LLC as a win for national security, they ignored the details written in the fine print. TikTok's privacy policy has for some time included tracking of location and citizenship status, among other identity markers such as sex. They've recently updated their language to add more specificity about the personal data they track so as to be in compliance with state laws. By housing TikTok's data on Oracle's cloud infrastructure, a firm whose multi-billion-dollar existence is owed in part to U.S. intelligence and law enforcement contracts, and whose co-founder Larry Ellison recently bragged about AI ushering in an era where citizens are on their best behavior, the government has finally achieved its aim of securing the app by integrating it into its domestic surveillance dragnet. Considering the drive to secure TikTok was driven by fears of what the notoriously repressive nation of China might do with our private data, this outcome is, at the very least, highly ironic. The technical wizardry of this surveillance relies on your mobile advertising ID, or MAID, a unique string of alphanumeric characters assigned to every smartphone. Every time an app, be it TikTok or a simple weather tracker, makes a bid to show you an advertisement, if your location services are enabled, it shares both your MAID and your precise GPS coordinates with thousands of private bidders. In the past, this metadata had been used by the Pentagon to identify targets. Data brokers like Ventel and Babel Street harvest these bid stream crumbs into massive, searchable oceans of movement. For ICE, this means they no longer need a wiretap. They can access a digital twin of your life, where your TikTok scrolling habits are pinned to a physical map of your home, workplace, and your child's school or daycare. The Fourth Amendment nominally requires a warrant and probable cause to search your person or effects. But in the age of surveillance capitalism, the Department of Homeland Security has discovered a loophole. Why bother with a judge when you can just buy the data from a private broker? This is the spending around strategy. By leveraging data originating from TikTok and similar platforms, ICE no longer needs to infiltrate communities. They simply tap into the flow of data already being harvested by private entities, allowing them to target both the undocumented and the political opposition. Once this data enters the DHS ecosystem, it doesn't sit in a silo. It's fed into a high-tech meat grinder of enforcement tools designed to identify and disappear people with industrial efficiency. These include ICE's Elite app, developed by Palantir, which fuses government and private data to generate neighborhood maps of individual dossiers of targets, each with an individualized confidence score. This app can tap into everything from flock license plate readers to Ring cameras, allowing ICE to follow targets without being physically present. One can easily imagine a scenario in which data originating from TikTok provides the last missing piece, user location, citizenship status, that ICE needs to greenlight one of its raids. Perhaps most dangerously, ICE is now utilizing advanced social media monitoring to perform sentiment analysis. By scraping TikTok and other platforms, they can monitor the emotional and political temperature of entire geographic areas, identifying resistance hotspots. This completely undermines a particularity requirement of the Fourth Amendment. Where the government can buy its way around the Constitution, the result is what we saw in Portland, an ICE agent labeling a citizen a terrorist for exercising her First Amendment rights. If Congress allows these private data loopholes to stand, ICE's database will soon include anyone who dares to criticize the administration, and content filtering will ensure that any video record of ICE violating our civil liberties will remain unseen. When that happens, the Roberts Court won't need to gut the First and Fourth Amendments. It can just wait until everyone agrees to the privacy policy. Not to say that you gotta hand it to these guys, but admittedly, I don't know that I would have thought of just buying the information. Okay. Honestly, I wouldn't say clever per se, because, in retrospect, it seems kind of like, oh yeah, of course you can, but I don't know. I didn't see that one coming, I'll be honest. I didn't expect that. And it's almost laughably simplistic, right? That, yeah, the government can't just take your data. They need to subpoena it. They need to get a court order to surveil you. Unless you've already agreed that all of that information being gathered about you can be gathered by a third party, and they can sell it to whoever they want. And your information can just be collected and sold. And then the government, if they want it, can just go and buy it. It's kind of ridiculous. But it's also simple and, I don't know, okay. All right, I see how this happened. I feel like, out of all of the concerns that I've previously had about my data being collected and sold, I didn't think selling it to the government was one of the things that would come up. I just kind of assumed that the government was just going to steal it. So it's kind of funny in a way. I mean, it just really goes to show the feedback between corporations and the government. The government is using my tax dollars to buy their information that these private corporations have scraped with their surveillance off of me, rather than just doing it themselves. They've privatized surveillance in a way. Fun fact, privatization was a term invented to describe the Nazi relationship with capital. So that's just interesting. The what do they call it specifically? The data bypass? No, it's on here somewhere. Oh well, it doesn't matter. You read it in the article. I actually do encourage you to go and read the whole article. Spending around, that's what they call it, spending around. They're circumnavigating the law by just purchasing the end product. Interesting. I do highly encourage you to go into the comment section, or the description rather, and find this full article and read the whole article. It is a lot more technically descriptive and in-depth than the section that we read out loud today. So if you have time for that, go read through that. It's very interesting and has a lot more going on. But the core basis is when you download apps, namely TikTok, specifically TikTok, and especially now that the United States owns TikTok. When you download that, you agree to the user agreement, which allows just you signing away your rights, basically right to privacy, to TikTok for them to scrape your information, including basically everything that they can get about you. And then they can sell that information to a private corporation, mostly ad companies, but to anyone who wants to buy it, such as the United States government, or I guess presumably other governments as well. And speaking of other governments, I love the way that the article describes this. Considering the drive to secure TikTok was driven by fears of what the notoriously repressive nation of China might do with our private data. The outcome is highly ironic. It's not ironic at all. The hyper-repressive nation of China. The United States is repressive. The United States' entire apparatus is about repression. Repressing the working class. Repressing people of color, especially indigenous people, and especially black people, and especially right now, Hispanic people. Repressing workers of the global south. Repressing nationalism, or Arab nationalism, instead of white nationalism during the 1960s. Repressing independence, repressing freedom in Cuba, repressing freedom in Iran, repressing freedom wherever the United States goes. The United States is repressive. The United States is the most repressive, most violent military society on earth. And I'm supposed to just pretend that China is worse because, I don't know, Asian people or whatever. You kidding me? And what we're trying to do with my data. And this, I'm pretty sure I've said this before on the show. I don't care what China does with my data. What are they going to do? They're going to build a profile of me for some reason, and then what? Literally, what was China ever going to do with my data? Anything at all? They're going to hack into my toaster and be able to read my conversations at my home where I'm like, wow, I really liked reading that excerpt from Mao's Little Red Book today. Like, what was China ever going to do with my data that would pose a threat to me or a national security risk for the United States, honestly? I know what the United States will do with my data, because we've already seen it, building databases of dissenters, of dissidents with the government, marking them as dangerous people, as being material threats to law enforcement, to, put them on the canary list for so-called anti-Semites, for people who say, hey, murdering Palestinians is wrong. That's what the United States government does with your data. Builds profiles to prevent people from being able to enter or leave the country. Tracks down illegal or non-illegal immigrants in the United States in order to ethnically cleanse them from this country. That's what it does with data. You don't see them hunting down white supremacists or neo-Nazis or but I repeat myself, or cops, but I repeat myself, or any actual threats to the working class of this country. What was China going to do? And no one's ever given me a good answer on that. It's always, China's going to have your data, and then what? And even this article, the notoriously repressive China might get your data. Oh no. Why is that bad? Why? Because China's repressive? Allegedly? How is China going to repress me? They're going to wait for me to go there? And then do something? They're going to do that for all 330 million Americans? Come on, let's be real. Also, the China's so repressive is just ridiculous, especially compared to the United States. China might have its own problems that I fully trust the Chinese people to be able to settle on their own in their own due time whenever they get around to it. But comparing the United States to China and saying that China is the worst one, how many articles have we read today alone about the United States being a violent, repressive, military capitalist force that exploits the public, both at home and abroad? We're going to say China's the repressive one? Sure. When's the last time China invaded a country? 1979? Donald Trump has attacked, 7 different countries in the last year? So, I'd love to see the argument for that from this. Yeah, so like they suggest, or one of the other articles suggests, is straight up boycotting these social media companies or just anything that's going to scrape your data, especially TikTok. Honestly, you probably shouldn't have TikTok in the first place. I know a lot of people have gotten so informed about, especially Palestine, on it. That's why, one of the major reasons why they sought to buy it. Is why they're suppressing left-wing or left-leaning thought on the platform, et cetera, especially about Palestine. But, it's another one of those corporate apps that's designed to get you to watch ads in order to generate revenue for shareholders, and really is not interested in your well-being. And, now it's run by the United States, and you're scraping your data and giving it to the DHS in order to build a profile on you and in order to track you and your interests to determine whether or not you're a current or potential dissident, which could mark you as one of those nihilistic, violent extremists that they all warned about and that they believe is the number one threat to America here at home. Solidarity Television is an independent grassroots news organization. That means we rely exclusively on viewers like you. Support us at solidaritytelevision.org. Every week there's more news than we can reasonably cover. Here are a few stories you should know about. Democratic governor ramps up methods to rein in ICE in her state, February 12, 2026, via New Republic. Governor Mikey Sherrill has banned ICE from state property in New Jersey. Sherrill signed an executive order Wednesday barring Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents from entering, accessing, or using non-public areas of state-owned property without first receiving a judicial warrant. Examples of non-public state property include government offices, child care centers, residential medical facilities, and state university residence halls. The governor also announced that she would launch a portal for residents to submit details of their interactions with ICE agents in New Jersey. The portal is intended to allow state investigators to hold ICE agents accountable for the kinds of illegal actions Americans have witnessed across the country, including the use of excessive force, warrantless searches or arrests, racial profiling, and wrongful detentions. Gallup to stop tracking presidential approval ratings after 88 years, February 11, 2026, via The Guardian. The company said on Wednesday it would stop measuring the favorability rating of individual political figures, which reflects an evolution in how Gallup focuses its public research and thought leadership, after 88 years. The Gallup presidential approval rating is one of the most cited barometers of public opinion in the president's performance, and has been in use since Harry Truman was in office. Trump's second-term approval rating fell to 36% in December, which is among the lowest ever recorded by the company. The U.S. president started his second term with an approval rating of 47%. Pentagon makes largest known arms purchase from Israel for banned cluster weapons, February 6, 2026, via The Intercept. The Department of Defense has quietly signed a $210 million deal to buy advanced cluster shells from one of Israel's state-owned arms companies, making unusually large new commitments to a class of weapons and Israeli defense establishment, both widely condemned for their indiscriminate killing of civilians. The deal, signed in September and not previously reported, is the department's largest contract to purchase weapons from an Israeli company in available records, according to an online federal database that covers the last 18 years. In a reversal of the more commonly seen direction for weapons transfers between the countries, in which the U.S. sends its weapons to Israel, the U.S. will pay the Israeli weapons firm Tomer over a period of 3 years to produce a new 155mm munition. The shells are designed to replace decades-old and often defective cluster shells that left live explosives scattered across Vietnam, Laos, Iraq, and other nations. The terror of cluster weapons persists long after the guns that fired them have quieted, as civilians return to the fields, forests, and settlements laced with bomblets that can explode years later without warning. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of The People's Report. Don't forget to subscribe at solidaritytelevision.org. Organizing the working classes of the world in solidarity forever.